Sophia slowly opened her eyes to the soft beeping of a machine. She felt weak and confused. The bright lights above made her squint, and everything around her smelled like medicine. Her head ached, and her body felt heavy, but she was alive. A doctor walked in with a kind smile and told her she had been in a bad accident. She had been unconscious for weeks, but now she was on the road to recovery. As she lay in the hospital bed, memories began to flash through her mind. One memory in particular refused to leave: Ethan. His face appeared so clearly in her thoughts, his warm smile, and the way he used to look at her as if she was his whole world. But thinking about him brought pain, a sharp ache in her chest. She didn't want to remember. She had promised herself to forget him. He was the reason her heart was broken. He was the reason she had chosen to leave her old life behind. Sophia tried to push the thoughts away. She reminded herself of her decision to start fresh, to live a new life where Ethan didn't exist. But as much as she tried, his memory kept coming back. The nurse brought her a small bag of her things. Inside, Sophia found her phone, a notebook, and a necklace. Her hand froze when she touched the necklace. It was the one Ethan had given her, a simple silver pendant with the word "Forever" engraved on it. Her heart sank. She thought she had gotten rid of it long ago. Why was it here now? Sophia stared at the necklace, her chest tightening with emotions she didn't want to feel. Memories of Ethan flooded back, his laughter, the way he used to hold her, and then the pain of how it all ended. Tears threatened to fall, but she wiped her eyes quickly. Number. She wouldn't let herself go back to that place. She had worked so hard to forget him, to move on. This necklace didn't belong in her new life. Taking a deep breath, Sophia got out of bed and walked to the trash can. She held the necklace tightly for a moment, her fingers trembling. Then, with a sharp exhale, she dropped it in. It was over. She had to let go of everything connected to Ethan, no matter how hard it felt. She told herself she had made the right decision. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital window. Sophia felt a little stronger, both in her body and in her heart. She smiled faintly, thinking about the future she was going to create for herself. She signed her discharge papers, packed her things, and walked out of the hospital, leaving the necklace, and everything it reminded her of, behind. But what Sophia didn't know was that life had its own plans. Even though she was ready to forget, fate wasn't done with her yet. It had already started working in the background, preparing to bring Ethan back into her life in ways she never imagined. Sophia stepped out of the hospital, into the crisp morning air. The sun warmed her skin, and she closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. It felt like freedom, like a chance to begin again. She clutched the strap of her small bag and smiled faintly. This was her fresh start. She promised herself she wouldn't look back. She returned to her apartment, the one she had moved into months ago when she decided to leave her old life behind. It was small but cozy, decorated with soft colors and simple furniture, everything she needed to feel safe and alone. Sophia sat down at her desk and opened her notebook, the same one she had carried for years. Its pages were filled with thoughts, dreams, and moments she wanted to hold on to, but as she flipped through, she noticed something odd. In the back of the notebook, tucked between two pages, was a photograph. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw it. It was a picture of her and Ethan, taken on the day he had surprised her with that necklace. They were smiling, their arms around each other, looking so happy it almost didn't feel real. Sophia stared at the photo, her chest tightening again. She didn't remember putting it there. In fact, she thought she had thrown away everything that reminded her of him. She slammed the notebook shut, her heart pounding. "No," she whispered to herself. "I'm not doing this, not again." She grabbed the photo and crumpled it in her hand. Just as she was about to toss it in the trash, her phone buzzed. Startled, she dropped the photo on the desk and reached for her phone. It was a message from her best friend, Emma. "Hey, there's a big event tomorrow night at the gallery. You have to come. It'll be fun, I promise. Don't say no." Sophia stared at the message, unsure. She had been avoiding social events, avoiding people in general ever since the breakup. She didn't want to risk running into anyone who might bring up Ethan or remind her of the past. But something in her stirred. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was time to step out of the shell she had built around herself. She sighed and typed back, "Fine, I'll come." But only for a little while. Emma replied almost instantly with a string of excited emojis, making Sophia smile despite herself. The next evening, Sophia dressed in a simple but elegant outfit and made her way to the gallery. The place was buzzing with energy, bright lights, beautiful art, and people laughing and chatting. For a moment, she felt out of place, but Emma appeared out of nowhere and pulled her into a warm hug. "You're here, finally," Emma said with a grin. As the night went on, Sophia began to relax. She even started to enjoy herself, sipping on a glass of wine and admiring the art. But just as she was beginning to feel at ease, she heard a voice behind her, a voice she hadn't heard in months but knew all too well. "Sophia?" Her heart stopped. She turned slowly, and there he was, Ethan, standing a few feet away, looking just as she remembered him. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment everything else faded away. It was like the universe had pressed pause, leaving just the two of them in the room. Ethan's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said quietly. Sophia didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, her emotions a storm she couldn't control. She had promised herself she would forget him. She had sworn to move on. But now, standing face to face with the one person she had tried so hard to erase, she realized that forgetting him was never going to be that simple. Sophia's breath quickened as she stood frozen in place, staring at Ethan. Her thoughts tangled, her emotions wrestling for control. She wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready for him. Yet here he was, standing just a few feet away, his familiar gaze fixed on her as if no time had passed. She stammered, but stopped herself. What could she say? The last time they had spoken, it had ended in heartbreak. She thought she'd buried those feelings, locked them away somewhere they couldn't hurt her anymore. But now, with him standing in front of her, all the walls she had built felt like they were crumbling. Ethan stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Sophia, I didn't mean to startle you. I didn't even know you were back in town." He hesitated, his eyes scanning her face as if trying to read her emotions. "You look good." His words made her chest tighten. How could he act so calm? How could he talk to her like nothing had happened, like he hadn't been the one to break her heart into pieces? Sophia took a step back, needing space, needing air. I'm just here for the event," she said, her voice clipped. She tried to keep her tone steady, but even she could hear the shake in it. Emma, sensing the tension from across the room, hurried over. "Oh, there you are," she said cheerfully, oblivious to the storm brewing between them. She glanced at Ethan and smiled politely. "Hi, I'm Emma, Sophia's friend." Ethan nodded, his expression polite but distant. "Ethan?" he said simply. His eyes flicked back to Sophia, and for a moment, it felt like he wanted to say more. But instead, he gave a slight nod and stepped back. "It was good seeing you, Sophia. Take care." And just like that, he turned and walked away. Sophia felt a wave of relief mixed with something she couldn't quite name. Disappointment? Regret? She wasn't sure. "Who was that?" Emma asked, her voice low and curious. Sophia forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "No one, just someone I used to know." She turned away quickly, hoping Emma wouldn't press further. But as much as she wanted to pretend the encounter hadn't shaken her, her mind wouldn't let it go. Ethan's presence lingered in her thoughts like a shadow, impossible to ignore. Later that night, back in her apartment, Sophia paced the room, replaying the encounter over and over in her mind. She felt angry. Angry at Ethan for showing up, angry at herself for reacting the way she did. She had promised to forget him, to move on. So why did seeing him feel like opening an old wound that hadn't fully healed? Her eyes fell on the crumpled photo still lying on her desk. Against her better judgment, she picked it up and smoothed it out, staring at the faces in the picture. They had been so happy, so full of hope. What had gone so wrong? Sophia shook her head and tossed the photo back onto the desk. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past. She needed to focus on the future. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the last time she would see Ethan. Something about the way he had looked at her, the way fate kept pulling their paths together, it felt too deliberate to be a coincidence. And though she hated to admit it, a part of her was terrified of what might come next. The next morning, Sophia woke up feeling restless. Her dreams had been a chaotic swirl of memories and emotions. Ethan's face kept appearing, his voice echoing words she couldn't quite make out. She groaned, pressing her hands to her face. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be moving forward, not sinking back into the past.
Deciding to shake off the unease, she busied herself with work. Sophia had a freelance writing job that kept her occupied most days. She buried herself in her laptop, typing furiously, determined to drown out the thoughts of Ethan. But even as she worked, her mind drifted. His voice, his presence, the way he looked at her, it all replayed in her head like a stubborn song she couldn't stop humming. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Emma. "You okay? Last night was intense. Let me know if you want to talk." Sophia sighed and texted back a quick, "I'm fine, thanks," before tossing her phone aside. She wasn't ready to talk about it, not even with Emma. She couldn't admit that seeing Ethan had stirred something in her she thought she had buried forever. Later that afternoon, Sophia decided to take a walk. The crisp air and the bustling streets of the city usually helped clear her mind. She wandered aimlessly, letting her feet guide her until she found herself in a quiet park. The sight of couples walking hand in hand and children laughing made her chest ache. She shook her head, scolding herself for being so sentimental. But as she turned a corner, she froze. Sitting on a bench a few feet away, his head bent over a book, was Ethan. Her heart skipped a beat. How was this even possible? Of all the places in the city, why was he here? She thought about turning around and walking away before he noticed her, but her body betrayed her, rooted to the spot. Ethan looked up, as if sensing her presence. His eyes widened slightly when they met hers, and he stood up, closing the book in his hands. "Sophia," he said, his voice soft and unsure, as though he didn't know if she'd stay or run. Sophia's mind raced. She didn't want to have this conversation, didn't want to face whatever it was that fate seemed determined to throw at her. But there was something in Ethan's expression, something vulnerable, almost pleading, that stopped her from walking away. "Hi," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon," he said, his tone careful. Sophia let out a small, humorless laugh. "Neither was I." She crossed her arms, trying to shield herself from the emotions swirling inside her. "What are you doing here?" "I come here sometimes to think," he admitted. He hesitated, then added, "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable last night. I'm sorry if I did." His apology caught her off guard. She had expected him to brush past the tension or act as if nothing had happened, but instead he seemed sincere. It threw her off balance. Sophia sighed, looking away. "It's not that. I just wasn't ready to see you. That's all." "I understand," Ethan said quietly. He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to, but if you'll let me, I'd like to explain. About everything." Her chest tightened. Part of her wanted to shut him down, to tell him she didn't need his explanations or his apologies. But another part of her, a small, stubborn part, was curious. What could he possibly say that would make any of it make sense? "I don't know," she said finally, her voice wavering. "I don't know if I want to hear it." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "I get that, but if you ever change your mind, I'll be here." Sophia didn't respond. She couldn't. The weight of his words, the sincerity in his voice. It was too much. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. But even as she left, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever Ethan had to say, whatever fate had planned for them, it was only just beginning. The days that followed were a blur for Sophia. She threw herself into her work, trying to focus on anything that could distract her from the growing storm inside her. But no matter how hard she tried, Ethan lingered in her thoughts. His voice, his eyes, the quiet sincerity in his words, they echoed in her mind, refusing to fade. She hated that he still had this effect on her after everything. One evening, as she sat at her desk staring blankly at her laptop screen, her phone buzzed. It was Emma again. "You've been quiet. Let's grab dinner tomorrow, my treat." Sophia sighed, typing a quick reply. "Sure." She figured some company might help take her mind off things. Besides, Emma always had a way of pulling her out of her head, even if only for a little while. The next evening, Sophia met Emma at their favorite diner. It was a cozy, unassuming place that always smelled like fresh coffee and baked bread. As they sat in their usual booth, Emma launched into her usual chatter about work, life, and the latest gossip. Sophia smiled and nodded, grateful for the distraction. But eventually, Emma's tone shifted. "So," Emma said, leaning forward, "are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess?" Sophia stiffened. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Emma raised an eyebrow. "You know exactly what I mean. You've been acting weird since the gallery night. Does it have something to do with that guy? What was his name?" "Ethan." Sophia's stomach flipped. She toyed with her coffee mug, avoiding Emma's gaze. "It's nothing," she said finally. "I just wasn't expecting to see him, that's all." Emma didn't buy it. "Come on, Sophia. I'm your best friend. You can talk to me." Sophia hesitated. Part of her wanted to unload everything, to tell Emma about the necklace, the photo, and the chance encounter at the park. But another part of her wasn't ready to admit just how deeply Ethan still affected her. "It's complicated," she said at last. Emma sighed but didn't push. "Okay, fine. But if you ever want to talk, you know I'm here, right?" "Yeah," Sophia said softly, forcing a smile. "I know. Thanks." As they walked out of the diner later that night, Sophia felt a little lighter, though her thoughts still swirled with questions. Why had Ethan reappeared in her life now, after all this time? And what was it that he wanted to explain? She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't care. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The following morning, Sophia decided to clear her head with a walk. She found herself wandering back to the park where she had seen Ethan last. It was quiet this time, the benches mostly empty. She sat down and closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her. But just as she was beginning to relax, a familiar voice broke the silence. "I didn't think I'd see you here again." Her eyes snapped open, and there he was, Ethan, standing a few feet away. He looked hesitant, almost as if he was afraid she might run. She felt her chest tighten, but this time she didn't get up. Instead, she stayed seated, staring at him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. "I come here a lot," he said, walking closer. He hesitated, then sat down on the bench next to her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I didn't mean to bother you." Sophia studied him for a moment. He looked the same, yet different. There was something softer, more vulnerable about him now. It unsettled her. "Why are you here, Ethan?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. He looked down at his hands, silent for a moment. Then he said, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to, but there are things I need to say. Things I should have said a long time ago." Sophia's heart raced. She wanted to tell him to stop, to leave her alone. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "Why now?" Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Because I never stopped caring about you. And because you deserve to know the truth. Sophia's breath hitched. She didn't know what he meant, but something in his voice told her this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. And as much as she wanted to walk away, she couldn't deny the pull she felt, the need to finally hear what he had to say. Sophia sat frozen, her mind racing as Ethan's words hung in the air. The truth. What truth? What could he possibly say now, after all this time, that would make any difference? She clenched her hands in her lap, trying to steady herself, but her heart pounded like a drum. She wasn't sure if it was from anger, fear, or something else entirely. I don't know if I want to hear it, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. She stared at the ground, refusing to meet his eyes. What's the point, Ethan? It's too late. Ethan shifted, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I know, he said softly. I know I should have told you everything back then, but I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you. Sophia's head snapped up at his words, her brows furrowing. Protecting me? From what? Her voice sharpened, her frustration bubbling to the surface. You didn't protect me, Ethan. You broke me. Ethan flinched as if her words physically hit him. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling deeply. I know, he said again, his voice thick with regret. But there were things going on, things you didn't know about. I made a choice, and I thought it was the right one at the time. But it wasn't. Sophia narrowed her eyes, anger mixing with confusion. What are you talking about? What things? Stop speaking in riddles, Ethan. Just say it. He hesitated, his jaw tightening as he seemed to weigh his next words carefully. Do you remember that deal my company was working on? The one that was supposed to launch everything to the next level? Sophia narrowed her eyes, anger mixing with confusion. What are you talking about? What things? Stop speaking in riddles, Ethan. Just say it. He hesitated, his jaw tightening as he seemed to weigh his next words carefully. Do you remember that deal my company was working on? The one that was supposed to launch everything to the next level? It wasn't just a deal, he said, his voice low. It was a trap. Someone I trusted was working against me, trying to sabotage everything. And they didn't just come after me, they came after you too. Sophia blinked, her breath catching in her throat. Me? She asked, her voice shaking. What do you mean? Ethan looked down, his hands clenching into fists. They found out about us, about how much you meant to me. And they used it. They threatened to drag you into the mess, to ruin your name, your career, everything. I couldn't let that happen, Sophia, so I ended things. I thought if I pushed you away, if I made you hate me, they'd leave you alone. Sophia stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. It felt like the ground beneath her was shifting, her understanding of everything tilting on its axis. You're saying, you ended things to protect me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with pain. I thought it was the only way, but it was a mistake. I should have told you the truth back then. I should have let you decide. But I was scared, Sophia, scared of losing you in more ways than one. Sophia's heart ached at the raw emotion in his voice, but she didn't know what to feel. Anger? Relief? Betrayal? Gratitude? It was all too much. She stood up abruptly, needing space, needing air. Why are you telling me this now? She demanded, her voice cracking. Why didn't you just leave me alone if you thought it was better that way? Ethan stood too, his gaze steady. Because I can't stay away anymore, he said simply. I've spent every day since regretting what I did, wishing I could take it back. And now, seeing you again, I knew I had to tell you. You deserve the truth, even if it's too late for us. Sophia shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know what to say, what to do. The man she had loved, the man who had shattered her heart, was standing in front of her, pouring out the truth she had never expected to hear. And even though she wanted to be angry, to push him away again, she couldn't ignore the small, stubborn part of her that still cared, that still hoped. "I need time," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I need time to figure this out." Ethan nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "But I'll be here, Sophia. I'm not going anywhere this time." Sophia turned and walked away, her emotions swirling like a storm inside her. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Fate wasn't finished with them yet. Sophia walked aimlessly through the park, her mind a chaotic tangle of emotions. The cool evening air brushed against her face, but it did little to calm the storm inside. Ethan's words echoed in her head. "I thought I was protecting you." She couldn't decide whether to feel angry, betrayed, or relieved. Could she trust what he said? Was this the truth, or just another way to pull her back into his life? As she neared the edge of the park, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, half expecting it to be Emma checking in again. But the name on the screen froze her in place. It was Ethan. Her fingers hovered over the phone, debating whether to answer. After a long moment, she hit decline. She couldn't deal with him right now, not when her thoughts were still spinning. But Ethan wasn't done. Almost immediately, a text came through. "I know you're overwhelmed, but I need to show you something. Please, just one chance." Sophia stared at the message, her heart pounding. What could he possibly want to show her? A part of her wanted to ignore it, to cut him off completely. But another part, a quieter, more curious part, wondered if this was the missing piece, the thing that might finally give her closure. She didn't respond, but later that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She replayed their conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every expression. Was he telling the truth? Had he really ended things to protect her? And if he had, did that change anything? Did it change how much it had hurt? The next day, Ethan texted again. "I'll be at the coffee shop near the library at 4. If you don't want to come, I'll understand. But please, Sophia, give me this chance." Sophia stared at the message for a long time. Her instincts told her to stay away, to keep the wall between them firmly in place. But curiosity gnawed at her. She needed answers. She needed to know if there was any truth to what he had said. Before she could talk herself out of it, she texted back, "Fine, I'll come. But this doesn't mean anything." When she arrived at the coffee shop, Ethan was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. He looked up as she walked in, his eyes lighting up with a mix of hope and nervousness. Sophia hesitated at the door, suddenly unsure if she had made the right decision. But then, Ethan stood and gestured toward the seat across from him, his expression earnest. "I'm glad you came," he said softly as she sat down. Sophia crossed her arms, her gaze wary. "You said you had something to show me. Let's not waste time." Ethan nodded, reaching into his bag. He pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between them. "This is everything," he said. "Emails, contracts, messages, all the proof of what I told you. The threats, the sabotage, everything." Sophia stared at the folder, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't want to touch it, didn't want to see the evidence of how deeply Ethan's life, and by extension, hers, had been manipulated. But her curiosity won out. Slowly, she opened the folder and began to read. The documents were shocking. Emails from someone Ethan had trusted, detailing plans to ruin his reputation. Messages threatening to leak false stories about Sophia if Ethan didn't comply. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Her hands tightened on the pages as she read, her anger growing, not at Ethan, but at the people who had tried to destroy them. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. "Why didn't you let me fight this with you?" Ethan's face was filled with regret. "Because I didn't want you to suffer because of me," he said. "I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought pushing you away would keep you safe. But I see now that I was wrong. I hurt you, Sophia, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Sophia looked at him, her emotions raw and tangled. Part of her wanted to yell at him for making decisions for her, for robbing her of the chance to stand by his side. But another part of her, the part that still cared, felt a flicker of understanding. He had been trying to protect her, even if he had gone about it in the worst possible way. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. "I don't know if this changes anything," she said quietly. "But thank you for telling me." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "I just wanted you to know the truth," he said. "What you do with it is up to you." Sophia stood, her heart heavy. "I need time," she said again, echoing her words from the park. "This is a lot to process." "I understand," Ethan said. "Take all the time you need." As she walked out of the coffee shop, the folder's contents still fresh in her mind, Sophia felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness, and something she couldn't quite name. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was beginning to understand the past. And with that understanding came a small, tentative spark of hope. Over the next few days, Sophia found herself in a constant battle with her thoughts. The folder sat on her desk, untouched since she'd left the coffee shop. Every time she walked past it, her chest tightened. She couldn't stop thinking about the emails, the threats, the lengths Ethan had gone to protect her, even if it had meant breaking her heart. She hated that she was starting to see things from his perspective. It didn't erase the pain, but it made her question the anger she had held on to for so long. What if she had misunderstood everything? What if Ethan's decisions, as misguided as they were, had come from a place of love? Sophia decided to clear her mind with a walk. The crisp air was refreshing, and she let her feet carry her without a destination in mind. But no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts kept circling back to Ethan. She realized that ignoring the situation wasn't working anymore. She needed answers, closure, or maybe even something more. But to get that, she had to confront him again. That evening, she called Emma. "I need your advice," Sophia said as soon as Emma picked up. "Finally!" Emma exclaimed. "I was starting to think you were avoiding me. What's going on?" Sophia hesitated, then spilled everything: the folder, the threats, the explanation Ethan had given her. Emma listened quietly, her usual cheer replaced with a serious tone. "Wow," Emma said when Sophia finished. "That's a lot. So what are you going to do?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "Part of me wants to let it all go, move on and leave the past where it belongs. But another part of me feels like I need to know more. I need to understand why fate keeps pulling us back together." Emma was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe this is your chance to figure that out. I mean, it's not every day someone shows up with proof that they messed up because they cared too much. Maybe it's worth hearing him out one more time." Sophia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I just don't know if I can trust him again." "Trust takes time," Emma said gently. "But if you still have questions, you owe it to yourself to get answers. Otherwise, you'll always wonder what if." That night, Sophia sat at her desk, staring at the folder. Emma's words echoed in her mind. She knew she couldn't keep running from the past. If she wanted to move forward, she had to face it head on. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her phone and typed out a message to Ethan. "I need to talk. Can we meet?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course. Name the time and place." Sophia suggested the park where they had first run into each other. It felt fitting, in a strange way, to meet him there again. The next afternoon, she arrived at the park early, her nerves buzzing. She sat on a bench, watching the leaves fall from the trees, trying to calm the storm inside her. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, his expression cautious but hopeful. He sat down beside her, leaving enough space to show he wasn't trying to crowd her. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly. Sophia took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me," she began. "And I've been trying to figure out what I'm supposed to feel about all of this." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Sophia. I just want you to know the truth. Whatever happens next, that's your choice." Sophia looked at him, her emotions a swirling mix of anger, pain, and something softer. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. "You hurt me, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "You made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't worth fighting for." "I know," Ethan said, his voice thick with regret. "And I'll never forgive myself for that. But you were always worth fighting for, Sophia. That's why I did what I did. It doesn't excuse it, but it's the truth." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the park filled the silence, birds chirping, leaves rustling, distant laughter. Finally, Sophia said, "I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. But I also don't think I'm ready to walk away." Ethan's eyes softened. "That's more than I could have hoped for," he said. "Thank you, Sophia, for even considering giving me another chance." Sophia nodded, unsure of what the future held, but feeling, for the first time in a long time, like she was ready to take the first step toward finding out. Fate had brought them back together, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't done with them yet. In the days that followed their conversation in the park, Sophia found herself in a constant push and pull of emotions. The weight of Ethan's words lingered with her, mingling with the memories she had tried so hard to suppress. She wasn't ready to trust him fully, but something deep inside her kept tugging at the threads of their connection. The what-ifs that had haunted her for so long began to morph into cautious questions. What if he was genuine? What if this time was different? Ethan, true to his word, gave her space. He didn't flood her phone with messages or try to pressure her into seeing him. Instead, he sent a simple text each day. Short, thoughtful messages that reminded her he was there but never overstepped. "I hope your day went well. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I saw something today that reminded me of you. It made me smile." Sophia would read the messages and feel a strange mixture of annoyance and warmth. She wasn't ready to reply, but she didn't block him either. She needed time to think, to sort through her feelings without his influence. One afternoon, Emma invited her over for coffee, sensing that Sophia needed an escape from her own thoughts. As they sipped their drinks on Emma's small balcony, Emma turned to her with a curious smile. "So, are you going to keep him in limbo forever?" she teased lightly. Sophia rolled her eyes. "I'm not keeping him in limbo. I don't know what I want yet." Emma leaned back in her chair, her gaze thoughtful. "Soph, you've spent so much time trying to forget him, trying to move on. But it seems like fate isn't letting that happen. Maybe instead of fighting it, you should figure out why." Sophia stared into her coffee cup, Emma's words settling deep within her. She hated to admit it, but Emma had a point. She had spent so long building walls to keep Ethan out, but now that they were face to face again, those walls felt less like protection and more like a prison. That evening, after much deliberation, Sophia finally replied to one of Ethan's messages. "Let's meet. I want to talk again." The response came quickly. "Whenever and wherever you're ready." Sophia suggested a quiet cafe she often went to when she needed to think. The next evening, she arrived early, sitting at a small table by the window. She fidgeted with her cup, her nerves threatening to unravel her resolve. When Ethan walked in, his eyes immediately found hers, and he offered a cautious smile. "Thanks for coming," he said as he sat down across from her. Sophia nodded, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "About everything you told me. About us." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression open but serious. And I'm still angry," she admitted, meeting his gaze. "I'm angry that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth back then. I'm angry that you thought breaking me was the only way to protect me." "I deserve that," Ethan said quietly. "And I'm sorry. More than I can ever say." Sophia sighed, her emotions swirling. "But I also see now that you thought you were doing the right thing, and I can't ignore the fact that fate keeps throwing us back together. Maybe that means something." Ethan's eyes softened, a glimmer of hope shining through. "It means everything to me, Sophia. And I'll spend every day proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust. No more secrets, no more pushing you away. Just us, if you're willing to give me another chance." Sophia looked at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that they could start over. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. "I'm not promising anything," she said finally, "but I'm willing to see where this goes. One step at a time." A small, relieved smile spread across Ethan's face. "That's all I could ever ask for." As they sat there, the tension between them began to ease, replaced by a tentative sense of possibility. For the first time in years, Sophia felt like the pieces of her life were slowly falling into place. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't certain, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was all you needed. In the weeks that followed, Sophia and Ethan began a cautious dance of rebuilding. True to his word, Ethan respected her boundaries, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. They met occasionally, once for coffee, another time for a walk through the park, but every interaction felt tentative, like they were learning to navigate uncharted waters. Sophia couldn't deny that being around him stirred something deep within her. The memories of their past lingered, but so did the quiet moments of laughter they were rediscovering. It was strange, almost surreal, to see him now, not as the man she'd been angry at for so long, but as someone who was trying to earn her trust all over again. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet trail just outside the city, Ethan stopped suddenly. He turned to her, his face serious but gentle. "Sophia, can I ask you something?" She paused, slightly wary, but curious. "What is it?" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Do you ever wonder why fate brought us back together? I mean, after everything, do you think it's for a reason?" Sophia felt her heart skip. She had asked herself the same question so many times. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the leaves rustling in the breeze. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think about it a lot." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Sophia, but the one thing I've never doubted is how much I care about you, and maybe that's why we're here now, to see if we can make things right." Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was ready to believe in second chances, but hearing him say those words stirred something inside her, a flicker of hope she couldn't quite ignore. "I guess we'll have to see," she said softly. Over time, their cautious steps turned into something steadier. They began talking about their past, unraveling the misunderstandings and pain that had driven them apart. Ethan opened up about the pressure he had been under during the time of the threats and how his own fear of failure had clouded his judgment. Sophia, in turn, shared how abandoned she had felt, how deeply his actions had wounded her. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments where old wounds felt fresh again. But through it all, there was a growing sense of honesty between them, a willingness to face the hard truths they had avoided for so long. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, Sophia turned to Ethan. "You know," she said quietly, "there was a time when I thought I'd never be able to forgive you." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "And now?" She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. "Now, I think I'm starting to, slowly. But I am." His expression softened, a small, grateful smile forming on his lips. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you'll ever know." They sat in silence for a while, the city lights twinkling below them. For the first time in years, Sophia felt a sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was finally allowing herself to heal. She didn't know what the future held for them, but for now, she was willing to take it one day at a time. And as Ethan reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, she realized that maybe, just maybe, fate had brought them together for a reason after all. As the months passed, Sophia and Ethan found themselves in a rhythm neither of them had expected. Their connection, once fractured by pain and mistrust, began to rebuild itself brick by brick. There were still moments of doubt, quiet pauses where Sophia would question whether she was doing the right thing. But each time, Ethan's patience and honesty reminded her that healing was a process. One crisp autumn evening, they found themselves back at the park where they had first reconnected. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, and a soft breeze carried the scent of the changing season. They walked side by side, their conversations flowing more naturally now, as though the weight of their past had begun to lift. Ethan stopped by a small wooden bridge that stretched over a shallow stream. He leaned on the railing, gazing at the water below, and then turned to Sophia with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his tone serious but warm. Sophia raised an eyebrow, slightly amused. "That sounds ominous." He chuckled softly. "It's not, I promise. But I wanted to ask you, do you ever think about what it would take to truly start over? Not just for us, but for you. For your own peace." Sophia tilted her head, caught off guard by the question. "I guess I haven't really thought about it that way," she admitted. "I mean, I've been trying to move forward, but I don't know if I've ever truly started over. There's always been a part of me holding on to the past." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "Maybe that's why we keep ending up here, to figure out how to let go of the past without losing the parts of it that made us who we are." Sophia leaned against the railing beside him, her eyes fixed on the rippling water. His words resonated with her more than she expected. She thought about the pain she had carried for so long, the resentment and anger that had shaped her decisions. But now, standing there with him, she realized that letting go didn't have to mean forgetting. It could mean making peace with the past while embracing the possibility of something new. "What about you?" she asked after a long silence. "What would starting over mean for you?" Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "It means doing things the right way this time. Being honest, not just with you, but with myself. And proving every single day that I'm worthy of the second chance you've given me." Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't fully realized how much Ethan had changed until now. The man standing beside her wasn't the same person who had hurt her all those years ago. He had grown, just as she had. And for the first time, she allowed herself to truly believe that people could change. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "I wasn't sure if this was the right time," he said, his voice tinged with nervousness. "But I wanted to give you something." Sophia glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. He opened his hand to reveal a delicate silver bracelet, simple yet elegant. "It's not a replacement for the necklace," he said quickly, noticing her reaction. "It's something new, a symbol of a fresh start, if you're ready." Sophia stared at the bracelet, her heart swelling with emotion. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took it from his hand. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over his face. "You don't have to wear it," he added. "I just wanted you to have it, to remind you that no matter what happens, I'm here." Sophia smiled, slipping the bracelet onto her wrist. It felt light, almost weightless, like a promise of something better. As she looked up at Ethan, she realized she wasn't just holding on to hope anymore. She was beginning to trust again, not just him, but herself. That night, as she lay in bed, Sophia traced the bracelet on her wrist and thought about how far she had come. The pain, the anger, the fear. They were still there, but they no longer controlled her. She didn't know what the future held for her and Ethan, but for the first time, she was ready to find out. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of Sophia and Ethan's new relationship grew stronger. They weren't rushing anything. Both of them knew that trust and love needed time to grow. It was different now, more grounded, less about grand gestures and more about the quiet moments they shared. Each conversation, each laugh, each lingering glance felt like another brick in the foundation they were rebuilding. But life, as always, had its way of testing even the strongest of bonds. One evening, as Sophia was tidying her apartment, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before picking it up. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, sharp and confident. "Is this Sophia?" "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Who's this?" "This is Miranda," the woman said, and Sophia felt her stomach tighten at the name. Miranda was one of Ethan's old business partners, the one he had mentioned during their difficult conversations about the sabotage and threats. "I'm calling because I thought you should know something," Miranda continued, her tone almost too calm. "Ethan might have told you his version of the story, but there's a lot he left out." Sophia's heart began to race. "What are you talking about?" "I mean, he didn't exactly play the innocent victim," Miranda said, her words laced with something that sounded like satisfaction. "He made deals, Sophia. Deals that hurt people, all while keeping his hands clean. He's not the man you think he is." Sophia's grip on the phone tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you deserve the truth," Miranda said, her tone suddenly softer. "You've been through enough already. I don't want to see you get hurt again." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sophia staring at her phone, her mind reeling. Could Miranda be telling the truth? Had Ethan kept more secrets from her? Or was this just another attempt to manipulate her, to tear them apart? That evening, when Ethan came over for dinner as planned, Sophia couldn't hide the tension in her voice. "I got a call today," she said as they sat down at the table. Ethan's brow furrowed. "From who?" "Miranda." His expression darkened, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Anger? Fear? Guilt? "What did she say?" "She said you've been lying to me," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "That there's more to the story than you've told me." Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Sophia, listen to me. Miranda isn't someone you can trust. She's been trying to undermine me for years." "But is she lying?" Sophia pressed, her voice rising. "Is there any part of what she said that's true?" Ethan hesitated, and the pause felt like an eternity. Finally, he said, "There were things I had to do back then, choices I had to make to keep everything from falling apart. But I never lied to you, Sophia. I told you the truth about the threats, about why I pushed you away. Miranda is twisting things to make it look worse than it was." Sophia searched his face, her heart heavy with doubt. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But the seed of suspicion had already been planted. "Why didn't you tell me about the deals?" Because they didn't matter, Ethan said firmly. They had nothing to do with you or us. They were just business. Sophia stood, pushing her chair back. But they matter to me now, Ethan. Because if you're still keeping things from me, how am I supposed to trust you? Ethan rose too, his expression pained. I'm not that person anymore, Sophia. I've spent every day since trying to prove that to you. Don't let someone like Miranda ruin what we've built. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling torn between the man she had grown to trust again and the lingering doubt Miranda's call had stirred. I need time to think, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, his face falling. Take all the time you need, but please, Sophia, don't let her get between us. When he left, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. Sophia sank onto the couch, her mind swirling with questions. Could she believe him? Was Miranda trying to manipulate her, or was there a kernel of truth in her words? That night, as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Sophia realized that she was at a crossroads. Trusting Ethan again had been hard enough, but now, with this new shadow hanging over them, she wasn't sure what to believe. All she knew was that the next step she took would change everything.